of going across firms. So correlation among these business interests may create opportunities, so there may be increased risk, but they may be reduced risk. What we'll see is that depending on the industry, sometimes it's increasing risk and sometimes it's decreasing the risk. So this diversification may lead sometimes to reduced incentives, but having independent suppliers and customers may have value. But it may not always be a good idea to have some of them where the correlation is negative, so that, again, they might be taking advantage of the fact that one firm offers trade credit and another doesn't. And these nonlinear effects may be critical in terms of how supply chains form. And we might see it in terms of the structure. What I'm going to do is build on some of the previous work in this networking, particularly this paper by Jackson and Walensky, where it's just a model of where firms are just trying to maximize their value, and they're getting value from connections to others, to other firms. So there's a value that's associated with the firm itself, and then a value that comes from that firm's connection. This would be firm I's connecting to firm J, and then depending on how far away firm J is in terms of the overall network, that value might decline. And that declines by this parameter delta. And there's a cost for making these connections. What happens in the Jackson and Walensky, so we just have this linear kind of model. What happens in that model is either you get a graph where everybody's connected to one another, or there's one central firm and it just has everyone connected to it. Or in fact, firms decide not to make any links. So in a symmetric network where everyone kind of looks the same at the beginning, it leads to just these regular structures. However, it doesn't allow, this model itself doesn't have any nonlinearity. And what we might think of is that there's some kind of nonlinear effects. That is, there's some effect that I have a relationship with firm J as well as a relationship with firm K that may have an effect on how I value those two relationships. So it could be that I have two alternative suppliers. They're not all the time reliable. So by having those relationships with both of those suppliers, that means that I have more reliable supply. That means I'm going to be able to supply to my customers more effectively, and therefore there may be a benefit from having those two. However, if one of those firms is actually just going to try to take advantage of the fact that another is offering me maybe the more extensive forms of trade credit, then it may be a negative for me to have those kinds of relationships. So sometimes I might want to have those dual connections, sometimes not. And we want to see what may happen. So sometimes we may see something positive, sometimes we may see something negative. And what can happen, even if all firms were actually equal at the beginning, depending on the parameters that we can put into this model, we may get all kinds of networks that would evolve out of this very simple structure. So by adding in any kind of nonlinearity, even just the very first level, just this kind of interaction nonlinearity, so just by adding in these interaction terms, all of a sudden we go from either we just have one firm that connects to everybody else, or we have everyone connected in a complete kind of network, to something in which we can get any kind of network we might imagine. So it seems like if we're going to look at the world and we see networks that have very different kinds of structure, that these real-world networks seem to indicate some form of nonlinearity, and therefore we may see, a wide variety of kinds of connections.